Fresh meat.
New Line Cinema brought us the instant classic, A Nightmare on Elm Street. But their rushed attempt to use that film as the foundation of a franchise resulted in a sequel so underwhelming, it nearly killed the franchise right there. Hoping to redeem themselves, they brought in Elm Street creator Wes Craven to write the third film, only to rework his ideas into something very different than he expected. This is the story of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and we're going to find out what the f*** happened to this horror movie. New Line Cinema had been around for 17 years by the time they produced and released Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street in November of 1984. That film was such a huge success, it boosted the company to a whole new level. We wouldn't have gotten the likes of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Lord of the Rings if it weren't for the success of Elm Street. That's why New Line became known as the house that Freddy built. That first film did so well, New Line rushed a sequel into production, and they didn't let the fact that Craven didn't want to make a sequel, or that he had objections to the script written by David Chaskin, slow them down. Directed by Jack Shoulder, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, reached theaters only 8 days shy of a year after its predecessor, and it was understandably not well received, since it overlooked how much potential there was in the concept of a killer who came after you in your dreams, and instead told a haunted house/possession story that pulled dream stalker Freddy into the waking world. It wasn't just critics and fans who saw Freddy's Revenge as a misstep. New Line disappointed themselves so badly with the film, they weren't entirely sure they would continue the franchise, even though Freddy's Revenge had done well at the box office. One person who thought they had the right idea to get Elm Street back on track with a third film was the actor who had so perfectly brought Freddy to life in the first two movies, Robert Englund. Englund wrote a treatment that he called Freddy's Funhouse, and it would have paid homage to one of Craven's original sources of inspiration for the first Nightmare, the story of a Cambodian refugee who was convinced he would die if he fell asleep, and did end up suffering that exact fate. He fell asleep, he had a nightmare, and he never woke up. Englund's treatment featured a Cambodian parapsychologist, a character compared to John Lone in Year of the Dragon, who would team up with the older sister of the Tina character from the first movie to get to the bottom of what really happened to Tina. Meanwhile, Freddy was setting booby traps for victims in the Dream World version of the Elm Street house, the reason behind the Funhouse title. Englund said he didn't know how to end his treatment, so he took it into Cronenberg territory. He didn't elaborate on that, but he felt his lack of a cohesive ending was why the producers didn't go ahead with his idea. It became clear that Freddy's Funhouse wasn't going to happen when Elm Street franchise producer Sarah Risher approached Wes Craven to see if he'd be interested in writing the third film, and he actually took the job. Craven said he decided to return to the franchise partly because he was interested in exploring the nightmare concept further, but also because he wanted to negotiate percentage points in the sequels, which wasn't part of his deal on the first movie. He wanted some of that Freddy Krueger money he had been missing out on otherwise. He wouldn't be able to direct the film since he was working on Deadly Friend at the time, but in June of 1986, he was able to knock out a draft of the script with co-writer Bruce Wagner. You may know him as Uncle Frank from One Crazy Summer. Getting Craven back was a big deal, so it would have made sense if New Line Cinema had just gone ahead with anything he and Wagner wrote. How can you question Craven's ideas when he's the person who created the franchise? Well, that's not how it went. New Line did have questions and notes, and the film we know as A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is very different from the script Craven and Wagner turned in. Craven wanted the third movie be a rematch between Freddy and the first film's heroine, Nancy Thompson. And after confirming with actress Heather Langenkamp that she was willing to play Nancy again, he and his co-writer crafted a story that begins with Nancy going on a multi-state road trip in search of her father, who has been missing for 5 years, ever since the events of the first Nightmare. Nancy's father had been named Donald Thompson in the original film, which seemed to have slipped Craven and Wagner's minds, because in their script, the character shares a first name with the actor who played him, John Saxon, foreshadowing the name confusion that would come 4 sequels down the line in Wes Craven's new Nightmare. Nancy has car trouble in a town that has been stricken by an epidemic of teenage suicides. Young people have been coming to this place from cities all over the United States, apparently just to kill themselves. We'll eventually find out that this situation is not as it seems. These kids aren't committing suicide, they're being killed by Freddy. And they've been drawn to this town because they are dream warriors, a new generation of dreamers who are unknowingly but instinctively being drawn into battle with Freddy. This town is the chosen location for their battle with Freddy because it's the dream killer's hometown. There's nothing in the script about the killer being on a mission of revenge and targeting the children of Springwood. Freddy has moved far beyond that here, and far beyond Springwood. A line that's featured in Freddy's Dead was basically lifted from Craven and Wagner's script. Every town has an Elm Street. Some goofy moments aside, what Craven and Wagner wrote is much darker and dirtier than what Dream Warriors turned out to be. They wanted a Freddy that was scarier and more intense than ever before, but on the page that just turned out to be a Freddy who is more vulgar than ever before. He threatens anal violation. He says he's going to defecate on someone's corpse. And for the most part, he replaces his usual favorite insult, the B word, with the C word, if you know what I mean. The skeleton of a good idea was there. But Craven and Wagner's Dream Warriors script was not the movie anyone at New Line wanted to make. Once the producers had that script in hand, the writing duo was essentially shut out of the project. Craven would later say, quote, "I took an executive producing credit. My understanding was that I would be asked about things all along. I would be brought into the casting and have a real creative part in the picture. The reality was that New Line Cinema never really contacted me after they had the script. They changed it quite drastically in some ways. A lot of reasons I agreed to do the picture were taken away." When Craven was trying to get the first Elm Street made, the project was rejected by every major studio in Hollywood on its way to New Line. 20th Century Fox rejected it because they were already in the process of making a movie that dealt with dreams, the sci-fi adventure Dreamscape, which reached theaters 3 months before New Line released A Nightmare on Elm Street. So he suggested that New Line should take a chance on Dreamscape co-writer and associate producer Chuck Russell. Russell hadn't directed before, but he won New Line over with this pitch, which was the opposite of Craven's approach. Rather than making things darker, Russell wanted to make things more fun for the audience, to increase the dark humor and go bigger and more imaginative with the dream sequences. Before production could begin, the script needed a rewrite. Russell recruited his friend and future Oscar nominee Frank Darabont, whose only credit at that time was a short film adaptation of a Stephen King story, to help him with the script revisions. New Line gave them 11 days to get it done. Russell and Darabont met the deadline by locking themselves in a cabin for those 11 days so they could put all their focus on the script. They took material Craven and Wagner had provided and greatly improved it. They made Nancy a mental health worker with a reason for being at the psychiatric hospital, instead of just having Neil decide to take this stranger to work with him. They rooted the story in the Springwood mythology Craven had created the first time around. They added more depth and personality to the Dream Warrior characters and gave further meaning to the description Dream Warriors by giving them all special powers. But Russell and Darabont put more emphasis on them. They also made the dream-suppressing drug Hypnosil more important. In the script they were working from, it was just something that Nancy had been taking but was no longer doing anything for her. They wrote much better scenes for John Saxon's Donald Thompson. They ditched all the stuff about Freddy's childhood home, but they did give further information on Freddy's childhood, while drawing inspiration from Russell's days at attending Catholic school. The ghostly nun character we find out is Freddy's mother Amanda Kruger, and the details of Freddy's conception, the fact that he's the bastard son of 100 maniacs, that was all Russell and Darabont. They went further with the religious element by also sending Donald Thompson and Neil to put Freddy to rest with a cross and holy water. Even though Craven had a strict religious upbringing, the only trace of that in the script he wrote with Wagner was Kristen's parents threatening to send her to Catholic school, leading to a church-themed dream that, if it had been a movie, would have had actress Patricia Arquette suffering from stigmata 12 years before she starred in the movie Stigmata. Craven and Wagner's script stated that Freddy was getting stronger, but it was Russell and Darabont who gave a specific reason for his increase in strength. It was their idea that he was absorbing the souls of his victims.
The souls of the children. Give me strength.
And that these souls would be represented by the faces of the victims appearing on his torso. Comparing the first draft of the script to the finished film, it is truly impressive to see how Russell and Darabont took the broad strokes of ideas Craven and Wagner provided and turned them into something much better. With Russell at the helm, Dream Warriors started filming in September of 1986. The same month the deal with Langenkamp was officially closed, just 3 months after Craven and Wagner finished writing the first draft, and only 5 months before the February 27th, 1987 release date that New Line had already set in stone. It was a bumpy ride. The initial production schedule was 40 days, but there were still some scenes being shot in January. The script was packed with so many special effects, it would probably have required a $20 million budget to do them all as described. But Russell had to make it work on a budget of $4.5 million. To ensure they'd be able to get everything they needed on film, there were multiple units working at any given time. First unit, second unit, 2 separate FX units, and 3 makeup units. As you can imagine, everyone Having to work so hard to get so much done in so little time caused a lot of tension on the set. Langenkamp, who had quit smoking before filming began, but went back to it to deal with the stress of production, has said there was more tension on the Dream Warriors set than any other set she has ever been on. During the shoot, she told Fangoria, quote, "We are under the gun schedule-wise, and time tends to put a lot of pressure on people and shorten tempers. There have been a few explosions so far, and most of those have centered around the fact that everybody thinks everybody else is not working fast enough." One of the worst moments came during the filming of a nightmare sequence in which Langenkamp and some of her co-stars were stranded on an elevated section of a hot set and weren't being provided with water. They all started to feel faint, and Langenkamp said they started, quote, "screaming and hollering and acting cranky," because they were in real agony. Englund would also report there was a time on set when Langenkamp actually did pass out and had peat moss stuck in her contact lenses. Rodney Eastman, who played Joey, had a harrowing experience of his own during the shooting of the tongue-tied scene because the bed he was tied to with all those tongues was standing upright, not lying down as it appears in the movie. So, as Eastman describes it, he was basically crucified for the filming of that moment. It has been said that nearly everyone on set had a crush on Patricia Arquette, but she almost didn't make it through her first day in the role of Kristen. It wasn't just her first day on the Dream Warrior set, it was her first day acting on any set. This was her screen debut, and according to Russell, she had a bit of cold feet during the shooting of her first scene. It certainly didn't help that she had been waiting for the production to get to that scene for hours. She wasn't asked to report to set until 4 a.m. She had trouble getting her lines out, requiring more than 50 takes. By the end of the ordeal, some of the producers were concerned that Arquette wasn't going to work out. There was talk about recasting the part, and there's been some conflicting information on what happened next. Russell has said that he's the one who stood up for Arquette, made sure she wouldn't be replaced because he liked the beautiful, haunted quality she brought to the character. However, line producer Rachel Talali said in the Never Sleep Again documentary that Russell never got over Arquette's rough first night and didn't interact well with her after that. The fact that Arquette chose not to reprise the role for the next film, where Tuesday Night took over as Kristen, could be an indication that she didn't have a great time on Elm Street. There were other actors who took issue with Russell's demeanor on set. Ken Sagos, who played Kincaid, said there were times when Russell didn't know how to speak with the actors, and Langenkamp said he had trouble communicating what he wanted from them. But he was making his directorial debut with Dream Warriors. You have to cut a person some slack when they have that kind of pressure on them. Russell intended this to be the last Elm Street movie, adding even more pressure into the mix. Someone who agreed that it should be the last, at first anyway, was Englund. It's funny to think back on now, knowing how much more Freddy the actor had in front of him. But by the time Englund signed on to play the character again in Dream Warriors, he was already tired of all the time he had to spend in the makeup chair to become Freddy. He saw the Elm Street franchise as a trilogy, and at one point said if a part 4 was made, it would be made without him. To show that Freddy was on the way out, he wanted to play the character like a cantankerous, dirty old man with a wisp of white hair visible on his burned scalp. Of course, that idea went out the window when the writers decided Freddy would actually be stronger than ever in this film. Englund's thoughts on playing Freddy changed as filming went on. By the time Dream Warriors wrapped, he decided that he'd be willing to keep playing the character. On the last day of additional photography on Dream Warriors, the crew was joined by 2 new grips, and no one realized until it was too late that these weren't employees at all. They were actually Elm Street fans who had infiltrated the set. Before they could be removed from the set, they left on their own. And on their way out, they stole the original brass and copper riveted Freddy glove, the one that was used for close-up shots to convince viewers this thing was really sharp and dangerous. It was a prop that had once been hanging on Craven's wall, and now it was gone. Those unscrupulous, overly enthusiastic fans got to see a behind-the-scenes glimpse of some Dream Warriors action that day. But they, along with the rest of fandom, had to wait until the end of the following month to see the full movie. We know how it was received at the time, because even to this day, Dream Warriors is considered to be one of the best entries, if not the best entry, in the Elm Street franchise. On that budget of $4.5 million, Dream Warriors earned almost $45 million at the box office, with more money coming in from its release around the world. Something that helped the film become such a massive success was the theme song written and recorded by the rock band Dokken, and by the accompanying video that featured Englund as Freddy. The Dream Warriors song is an awesome earbug that's a lot of fun to listen to. And apparently Englund and the band entertained themselves a bit too much on the set of the video. Nearly 20 years later, guitarist George Lynch gave an interview where he said that Englund, in full Freddy makeup, did some cocaine with the band and used the blades on Freddy's glove to serve the coke to everybody. New Line had a hit with a film that had its roots in the writing of Wes Craven, but was very different from what Craven and Wagner had actually written. So what did Craven think of Dream Warriors? The following year, he told Cinefantastique that while he disregarded Freddy's Revenge, he saw Dream Warriors as, quote, an interesting step up, although he said he, quote, would have made it much darker and more complex than it ended up being. Dream Warriors' box office haul made it clear that it wasn't going to be the end of the franchise like Russell thought it would be. John Saxon didn't even wait to see the numbers before putting his ideas for a future Elm Street down on paper. Just like Englund had written Freddy's Funhouse, Saxon wrote his own treatment for an Elm Street movie, and that treatment was dated the exact same day Dream Warriors was released, February 27th, 1987. But just like Freddy's Funhouse, Saxon's story, titled How the Nightmare on Elm Street All Began, was something the producers decided to pass on. Englund was kept busy because Dream Warriors proved to be so popular. It wasn't the movie Wes Craven had originally envisioned, but it was exactly what the audience wanted to see. It was a rush production that put a lot of strain on everyone involved. But when you see how good the finished product is, and how much love the fans have for it, you have to imagine that everyone feels like it was worth all the trouble they went through to get it done. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all your support.
I went to a wake on the soaked streets of Blue Island. And my father, though a strong man, you know, I swear I saw him crying. Another generation gone has ceased subsiding. When you say a prayer and you put him in the ground, you speak a whiskey and it's mark 'em bound. Ain't no new shit going down on the soaked streets of Blue Island.